If you're familiar with this channel, you might notice that regardless of what I'm talking about, I always try to encourage self awareness. I think it's very important to cultivate a high level of self awareness. Self awareness is what allows you to actually see what's going on inside of you instead of being pushed around by unconscious mechanisms like limiting beliefs, unhealed wounds, and automatic reactions. When you understand your thoughts, your emotions, and the patterns behind your behavior, you're no longer operating on autopilot. You acquire the ability to pause, to think, to choose, and to respond with intention rather than on impulse. And this is the foundation of real growth and transformation. With that being said, I also understand that many people struggle with the issue of feeling self conscious, which can get in the way of doing the inner work. And on occasion, someone will ask, how can I work on being more self aware without being so self conscious? First of all, let's look at this term. What does it actually mean to feel self conscious? I've never really liked that term, and the reason is simple. If we were to take that term literally, it would mean the same thing as being self aware. The whole aim of self awareness is to be more conscious of yourself, and that's a good thing. We should want to be self conscious. But that's not what people mean when they use that term. When people say they feel self conscious, they're not talking about awareness. They're talking about discomfort. They're talking about shame, embarrassment, and self judgment. They're talking about that unsettling feeling of being watched and evaluated, usually by themselves, but also with the fear that others might notice. So let's call it what it really is, not self consciousness, but self criticism, self judgment, shame, or embarrassment. Let's not use the term self conscious anymore. Throw that out. So the real question is, how do you become more self aware, more aware of what you think, feel, and do without falling into the trap of shame and self judgment? Now, I've talked about all this before, how there's a distinction between observation and judgment. When you look outside at the weather and you say that it's overcast, that's an observation. All you're doing is stating a fact. But the moment you say it's gloomy, that's a judgment. And judgments are not facts, they're opinions. They're interpretations that you lay over your experience. They're secondary to what is actually being observed. And most of the time, they're not even necessary. They don't add clarity or insight. In fact, most of the time, they obscure it, preventing us from seeing things clearly. So, our aim here is to observe ourselves without judgment or condemnation, to simply see what is there for the purpose of understanding ourselves more clearly. And one of the most helpful ways to do this is to approach yourself with a gentle curiosity. You're simply exploring your inner world to see what's there. And when you notice something happening, when you notice some mechanism behind your behavior or some belief behind an emotion, you just take interest in wanting to better understand it. Not to label it good or bad, but just wanting to understand what it is and how it operates. And if during that process you start to feel shame or self judgment rising up, if you begin to condemn or criticize yourself, you can apply the same method. Just get curious about it. Why do you feel ashamed? Where is that judgment coming from? Why is there this tendency to criticize and condemn? We can use the same curiosity to explore these reactions as well. And again, the whole idea here is to gain understanding. Understanding is the antidote to judgment. So the more curious you are, the more inquisitive, the more that you explore and examine, the more you'll come to understand yourself. And out of that understanding, compassion naturally arises. And this is the other important thing, that we approach ourselves with compassion. It's important to recognize that your flaws, failures, and imperfections are not indications that there's something inherently wrong with you. They're simply attributes of being human. Because every human has flaws and imperfections. Every human has limitations. Every human makes mistakes or falls short of some goal that they set out to achieve. Every person you admire secretly struggles with something. Every person who appears confident has moments of doubt and insecurity they hide. For every skill a person has mastered, there are 1,000 other things they do poorly, because no one has the time to master everything. The fact is, no one is perfect. Everyone has flaws. And that means that your imperfections don't make you any lesser than anyone else. It simply makes you human, just like the rest of us. And when you remind yourself of this, when you approach your own flaws with this understanding, it's a lot easier to be patient and forgiving and to have compassion. One of the ways to soften self-judgment is to imagine how you'd engage with a close friend who is struggling with the same issue as you. If that friend came to you and said that they were feeling insecure about something or that they felt like a failure, how would you respond to that? Would you tell them that they're worthless? Would you criticize them? Would you shame them? I would hope not. You would probably tell them that they're being too hard on themselves. You'd probably remind them that everyone struggles, that we all make mistakes sometimes. You would offer them kindness and comfort. And that same compassion that you would have for them is available to you as well. You just have to get into the practice of directing it inward. And here's something important to remember. Being self-aware doesn't mean obsessing over your flaws and imperfections. It doesn't mean constantly monitoring your every move, looking for mistakes. And it also doesn't mean trying to fix every little thing that you happen to notice. Because remember, we're not trying to achieve perfection here. The aim of self-awareness is simply to understand yourself more fully, more deeply, more consciously. Sometimes it just means checking in with yourself the same way you check in with someone you care about. You pay attention. You notice when something feels off, and you try to understand what's going on instead of ignoring it or beating yourself up for it. That gentle, honest, caring attention, that childlike curiosity of just wanting to know how it all works, that's real self-awareness. So if you want to be more self-aware without slipping into self-judgment, the key is to shift from criticism to curiosity, from condemnation to compassion. Real self-awareness is about coming to see yourself more clearly, without the fog of shame and self-judgment clouding your vision. And that doesn't require being flawless. It simply requires accepting the messiness of being human rather than condemning it. And when you can do that, self-awareness can become transformative. Because the more that we come to understand ourselves, the more we heal. and the more we grow. If you find value in this content, be sure to like, share, and subscribe.